peux y aller.
This is a great honor to receive Mario Draghi, who personifies hope for a European awakening in a world of nationalistic shrinking. So hope for Europe that would wake up. Europe is a huge space between the Second World War and the 80s. The GDP per European per capita of Europe caught up with the US, but now we decline versus the US. And it's not just the GDP per capita in Europe, but the GDP. Basically, the rupture innovation, high-tech innovations are made in the States. In Europe, it's mainly incremental innovation in mid-tech. And now, how can Europe catch up? How can we be innovative? We have all the potentials. We have the researchers, the mathematicians, the engineers. How can we be innovative again while preserving what we hold dear, democracy and freedom? Democracy and freedom is no longer in the US. What it's dear to our heart is the social model. It's in Europe, not in the US, and what we want to preserve is the environment, a fight against climate change. Now, how can we become, again, be innovative, catch up with China and the US without renouncing what makes us truly European? So this is the question that Benoît and myself are going to ask to Mario Draghi. And with no further ado, I give the floor to Benoît. Thank you, Philippe. Thank you to Mario Draghi for being with us today. The Draghi report was mentioned about 933 times per day since yesterday, so it was about time to discuss it directly with the author. So Mario Draghi, thank you very much for your presence. And now start with a simple question. The report was published about less than a year ago, 10 months ago. What is your perception of the reactions to this report, especially by the European Commission and the Member States, following the publication of your report? Well, I think not much has taken place. We still have 2 months before the first anniversary and to draw conclusions from the report, but many of us consider that the reaction of the Commission and the Member States were fairly disappointing. Is this a feeling you share?
Well, thank you for this presentation. Thank all of you for this warm applause at the beginning. Also, I should thank you for having invited me here. I feel very, very honored by that. Also, one apology, I will not speak French. So I have to continue in English. Well, I think we should take a middle road in judging the reactions to the Commission. Some things, I think the most important thing that will happen this year will be the Commission proposal on the 28th regime. That is key for freeing up the growth of SMEs, of small companies, and small innovative companies as well. I think that's what we really should watch in the coming months. Some things have been done in the realm of simplification, mostly on things that have to do with reporting on CSRD, on CBAM, on the EU taxonomy. Very little has been done on AI. The AI Act has to be changed in some parts, and so the GDPR, the General Data Protection, will have to be changed in some parts, but there isn't much progress, really. By the way, one good thing has been done and should not be changed is the Digital Market Act, because that is actually the only thing we have to protect our industry in Europe, our small industry especially, from the big hyperscalers, the big US companies. So some things have been done. The gigafactories, for example, received an enormous amount of interest everywhere in Europe. I think more things will have to be done, and soon. The main problem I see at this point is the speed, because the average time for adoption of an act, of a Commission act, is around 2 years, and the implementation is about 5 years, up to 5 years. And the last remark I would make is that very little has been done in the energy field. And let me say just one thing about that. There is a recent statement by Sam Altman, the founder and CEO of OpenAI, and he said that the cost of AI will eventually converge to the cost of energy. So either we are equipped for that, or we'll be stalling in the development of AI, which is definitely transformational.
Je vais poser la question suivante, c'est la relation entre l'élection de Trump et le rapport Draghi.
Between the election of Trump and the Draghi report, one way to look at things is to say that Trump will push the Draghi report. We say, okay, well, Europe has to deal with it itself, and we don't want to depend on the US. We have to wake up. The other one to say that Trump will make things harder by dividing Europeans. Well, sometimes I think, okay, Trump read the Draghi report, is worried because there is such a progress, you know, their head. So he's shooting he's shooting in the US university to reduce the gap. It could be a joke. Maybe he's applying the Draghi report by actually affecting the research potential of the US universities to attract. So how do you see the relationship between Trump and us?
Well, you see, it's both, really. Trump definitely spurred into action the European leaders on the defense. I think there's one thing that I have very much in mind is what happened in Germany from this viewpoint. Germany was a country where a politician who would be photographed near something military would lose votes instantly. It was a country that at the beginning of the war, the Russian war against Ukraine, there was a poll. And the question was, would you defend your country if it were to be attacked? 70% responded no. So in this country, Chancellor Merz announced the biggest ever investment in defense, also in infrastructure. We tend to forget that, but it's basically the biggest ever defense spending in defense. And for this purpose, he promoted the change in one of the pillars of fiscal policy for Germany. And ideally, it was meant to be for all Europe. Now, the other countries didn't follow that, but basically, and so the debt break. And he changed the constitution to this extent, and he enjoys a large cross-party support. So that's and he also said that Germany has to live up, something that was unsaid until now, that Germany has to live up to its responsibilities, that they will have to become a leader of Europe. And so it's all new things that have happened, but it's very important. So in this sense, Trump helped to spend more in defense. That's what he did, basically, because we would have to do it anyway, but it certainly shortened the time in which we could respond. But don't forget that Trump doesn't like the EU to be nice and loves Putin. So he's friend to all the people who think alike, people who hate Europe and love Putin. And in this sense, he's not helping the EU to put our minds together in order to give a unified response on many of the existential issues that are being discussed in the report.
La question suivante.
Now, the following question, to implement the Draghi report, shall it be all European countries together, but it may take a longer time, you know, we know there are, you know, the red tape and within the European Union, or shouldn't we adopt a sort of a coalition of the willing approach to say, okay, countries who wish to do so on certain topic, well, let's start it on defense, on energy, on AI, and then if you love me, follow me. So to have an approach to say, okay, okay, let's go to the best proposal, not the coalition of the willing. So how do you see this? Germany now is more dynamic. The UK is coming back to Europe. The countries are more motivated than others. How do you see this? Should we do it all together, or could we be coalitions of the willing?
Well, there are many reasons why the decision-making model of the EU is sort of at fault. But these reasons are not recent. It's been at fault for 20, 25, 30 years. The difference was that we didn't perceive at that time the absolute necessity to have a unified response on a variety of issues. So I would say now, first thing is assess some priorities that need a unified reform. If not all people follow, not all leaders follow, just move ahead with coalitions of the willing. I think the model started with defense will be easy, given the shortness of time, given the extent of the needs that have to be addressed. You need to respond. Now, whether it's 4 countries, 5 countries, or it's all 27 members, okay. But I think we should be open to, by the way, our treaty has various ways in which group of countries can act. One is called the enhanced cooperation, and another one is simply called intergovernmental treaties. But it's not completely, it has precedents. Take the case of Schengen, take the case of the euro. The euro is a coalition of the willing, in a sense.
I would like to come back to microeconomics. A large part of your report addresses the problem of regulation in Europe. This has been debated by all the business managers here, the excess of regulation in Europe in different domains, and the fact that the multiplication of regulations, local standards, and so on and so forth, is a form of obstacle to the integration of the single market, not just for goods, but also for services, even more for services than goods, actually. And therefore, your report, quite logically, suggests that we should go go beyond this fragmentation to have new steps in the unification of such certain markets, such as the telcos, the telecoms. But now there is a question of political economy. Behind each regulation, there is there are interests, vested interests. So how do we go beyond those vested interests? What is the good method to have this regulatory bing bang without hitting these vested interests, often private, sometimes public, which motivated the existence of such regulations? What would be the political economy of the implementation of the Draghi report? That's my question, basically.
That's an easy question. Now, I would answer with 2 words. You need leadership, 3 words, actually. You need leadership. And so, in other words, is what could be a good case for leaders to actually take responsibility of this move? Since most of this regulation actually protects domestic constituencies. So one thing that came to mind was to look back at another historical moment in our history, which is the creation of the single market in 1986. And some of the conditions are strikingly similar. Growth had declined from 5% on average in the 70s to 2% in the 80s. Intra-Euro trade was basically stalling because the market for intermediate goods, which were the only ones covered by the common market regulation, had saturated. And the US had enacted a series of restrictions on our exports, going from, say, in 75, the share of exports, of European exports covered by these restrictions was 8%, and 10 years later was 21%. So all these are similarities with today. And now I think we've got to accept that exports will not be the ultimate refuge, the valve of escape, because exports are now seriously hit by tariffs, by the depreciation of the dollar, and so on. So basically, I think that supplies the contour for a good case to take leadership. But you need that. If you don't have the sort of the confidence and the courage to cope with this, go against the vested interests of your country, I think nothing happens.
Mais on a des mauvaises expériences aussi, parce que tu as parlé de 1980.
You talked about 1986 and the amazing drive of the Single Act. Since then, we had the Bolkestein Directive, which wanted to liberalize services in Europe and which crashed against political disagreement in France. We talked about the Polish plumber, you know, will be invaded by Polish plumbers. That didn't work, so they were failures.
Yeah. Yes, so indeed, you'll have resistances, but again, here, what happened in the defense space of 4 countries joining their efforts, I mean, could even become a model, or certainly it's an idea to which everybody will think about when they are frustrated by the fact that you can't build a unified response.
Je voulais...
Allow me to ask a macroeconomic question. It's a very sensitive area because I put the question to a former president of the central bank in Europe, but there's a macroeconomic dimension, and you delivered a speech in December in Paris at the CPR. You said that if Europe exports lots of capitals to the US, if European companies invest in the US, it's not because of the excess of standards and the lack of perspective in terms of yield in Europe. It's because there's an imbalance between savings and investment. Europe saves a lot. And if you look at investment and consumption, it's not enough. So there's a macroeconomic dimension to this issue. The macroeconomic policies, the budget policies, the fiscal policies, the monetary policies, should they accompany the implementation of the Draghi report?
Well, yes, I mean, I think one can answer this question even not having been a central banker before. But the point is that, again, let's go back in history, and we see that all this gigantic surplus that we built, actually, before the great financial crisis, wasn't there. Before, we had investment, some sort of decent level of public investment in infrastructure, and we had, most importantly, domestic consumption lower than the United States, but growing more or less like in the US. It's only after the great financial crisis when we begin the years of austerity, so-called austerity, for about 10 years. I mean, we still are in that frame of mind, as a matter of fact. That what happens? Well, we didn't remove the regulation within Europe, so there was no possibility of selling and producing your stuff in Europe. And so the only possible response was to increase exports. And basically that's what happened. Now things are changing. Exports are being hit, as I was saying before, but also people realize that not having invested in infrastructure, when I mean infrastructure, I mean education, physical infrastructure, research as well, the infrastructure of R&D and so on, not having invested now shows all its costs. So there is going to be a rotation, but the rotation will happen only, otherwise we have stagnation. This rotation will happen only if we remove many of the barriers to the single market. If we decide to go ahead with public investment, and when we don't have the resources to do that, accept the fact that you may create common debt for common projects. I think that's the other important thing. And then, in a sense, the savings and investment union, the capital market union, will come last.
Je veux rebondir sur ce que vient de me dire.
Allow me to echo what Benoît said. We had a kind of European software. The idea was to constrain the member countries with lots of regulations. It is said of Europe that we are a regulatory giant and a budget dwarf. 3% of deficit in terms of the GDP, and operating expenses were on a par with growth expenditure, something that we didn't respect. The competition policy, on behalf of the competition policy in Europe, the state incentives were not authorized, and we decided to focus on competition, but with European help we can reconcile competition policy and industrial policy. We can borrow collectively. I remember the speech that you delivered at the Martin Feinstein lecture, and you said that if the member countries are serious about managing their public finance in exchange collectively, we can get some borrowing capabilities in order to fund the big investments that we have to make. To a certain extent, we should modern our economic software, and we need to move away from these regulatory constraints and the fact that we are a fiscal dwarf.
Let me say two words, one about investment and the other one about competition. About the regulation, we've already touched upon this before. On investment, we have something, I can't remember exactly the number of how much state aid was spent last year, of which only 1% was spent in European common projects of interest. The EIB has estimated that if we were to coordinate this state aid for doing common projects, this could create 0.5 percentage point of productivity growth more. So there's a strong case for using state aid in a different way. Unfortunately, even recently, the state aid rules were relaxed to give subsidies to this industry or the other industry, everything on a nation scale, on a national scale. Here there are, again, two issues. One is you want to protect your constituencies in a sense, and you have objectively political problems that would come from the fact that certain sectors are not growing anymore. That is, but the other reason often quoted is the so-called geographic return. In other words, I spend state aid for my country. I cannot do state aid for another country, but then you never do common projects, and the common projects are often the only thing you can do to increase scale. The EIB again had a good idea on this. Why don't we decide about where to spend the state aid on the basis of efficiency, and then we give to all the participants equity in this project, so they could get the returns of these investments. This is one way out.
J'avais une question.
I'm sorry, I forgot about competition.
Oui, competition.
Non, mais c'est pas grave. Hein.
No, I forgot about competition. The competition rules, the report touches upon that, and basically the point is that competition rules or operating procedures have to be modified to accommodate for innovation. The idea, competition brings innovation, but now we are seeing a world where also scale brings innovation. So have to be sort of find the middle ground here, where you won't certainly create an environment that's conducive to innovation, and at the same time, you should not prevent scale only when it's conducive to innovation.
J'avais une question, Mario. On veut...
A question. We want to be more innovative. Europe should innovate. disruptive technological innovation, but people in the profession said that we have to choose. If we are more innovative, we have to be socially less advanced. We have to choose between being more innovative and less protective, or more innovative and less inclusive. Do you think that we need to give up the social model in order to be more innovative, and can we become more innovative by beefing up our social model?
Well, the report rejects this reasoning. I remember at the beginning of the report when all my friends on the other side of the ocean were saying exactly the same thing. To grow, we have to reduce social protection, you have to backtrack on climate, and so on. So the report takes a different angle. It says we have some basic values: strong social welfare system, a fight to climate change, and we don't change that. So how can we grow and at the same time meet our fundamental values? And that's a strategy of this report. By the way, I seriously believe that to have a strong social welfare system is actually crucial in a time of profound transformation, technological transformation, because take the case of Sweden. Sweden has a blossoming innovation climate, and it's arguably probably one of the best from that viewpoint per number of inhabitants, clearly inhabitants. They have a strong social welfare model. That model addresses mobility, which is a key factor when you have big technological transformations. So that's the idea. Same thing with climate. So stop, huh?
No, don't worry. So, no.
The stop sign is not the right way, so just change it.
It's like the Maastricht Treaty.
Exactement, c'est comme les règles budgétaires.
It's like the Maastricht Treaty. This is not in the right sense.
Tout simple, hein, on a face à nous et surtout pleine.
So room is full, young people, students. So what's your message to all those young people here in the room? What can you tell them, under this hot tent? What do you say to them?
What the report has done. By the way, incidentally, let me say 2 words about the report. The report is the mixed contribution of the services of the Commission, of the industry, but also of a variety of high-quality contributors, and I've been blessed with their help, really. And 2 of them are here, and Jean Tirole was another one, and so on, to mention just a few French names. So going back to your question, the report has tried to indicate the road. Now, to continue on this line, I said before, you need leadership, but you also need the push of a generation that wants to stay in Europe, wants to be happy here, and wants to grow here. And that's you, the young people that are in this room. So the advice I have is fight, and hope. Thank you.